The sky above western Kansas was a lid of pale blue porcelain, cloudless and unmoved, casting a dull light across an endless sweep of dormant farmland. Jenna Price had been driving for hours, the narrow dirt road winding deeper into nowhere with each passing mile. Her GPS had long since given up, the signal flickering out somewhere between Clay Center and the horizon. She hadn't passed another vehicle in over an hour. The land was a flat whisper, vast and wind-worn, cut only by irrigation ditches and rusted barbed wire fences that bordered properties with names long forgotten. When the engine stuttered the first time, she ignored it. The second time, her heart skipped. The third, it died. A final cough, a lifeless halt, and then only the ticking of cooling metal filled the silence. Jenna sat behind the wheel, stunned by the suddenness of stillness. Her phone offered no comfort. One bar, then none. No data. No calls. She stared at the screen for a full minute before setting it down, realizing there was no one to text anyway. She stepped out of the car and pulled her jacket tighter around her. The wind was sharp and dry, slipping beneath her collar with the ease of a whisper. Her boots crunched the dust as she circled the car, hoping a look under the hood might yield answers. It didn't. She knew nothing about engines. Her hands rested on her hips as she scanned the landscape. That's when she saw it. A farmhouse, half hidden by a cluster of skeletal trees, its shape quiet and oddly symmetrical against the horizon. A long drive curled off the main road toward it, unpaved and barely distinguishable from the fields around it. The barn nearby leaned slightly to one side, like a tired sentinel. She hesitated. Every instinct she had as a woman traveling alone told her to be cautious. But there were no other choices. She grabbed her bag, locked the car out of habit, and started walking. The dirt clung to her boots. The fields whispered in the wind. Her breath came in small puffs. With each step, the farmhouse loomed larger, its paint worn to a deep, earthy red. The porch sagged just enough to suggest age, but not neglect. When she reached the steps, she paused. No birds. No animals. No movement. The stillness was almost reverent. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door creaked open. He stood there like part of the frame itself, tall, spare, withered. A face shaped by decades of sun and silence. His clothes were simple, an old denim shirt, patched at the elbow, and overalls so sun-faded they might once have been blue. He said nothing. Only looked at her, and she found herself explaining everything quickly, her car, the signal, the road, the need for help. Still wordless, he stepped past her, down the porch, and across the dirt with slow, heavy strides. She followed. It felt strange to walk beside someone who hadn't offered a single word, but his presence wasn't cold. Just quiet. At the car, he opened the hood, leaned in, and within moments began adjusting something with practiced hands. His movements were methodical, confident. His fingers, though scarred and knotted by time, moved like those of a man who had solved harder problems than dead engines. It took minutes. Less than 10. And then the engine was alive again, humming low and even. He wiped his hands on a rag that appeared from his back pocket, closed the hood, and started walking back toward the house without looking back. She followed again. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The floors were scuffed but clean. The furniture was aged, upholstered in muted patterns that had faded over years. Nothing new, but everything purposeful. On the mantel sat a collection of small stones, polished by time or water, placed in a row as if they were soldiers on parade. She was offered water in a thick, cloudy glass. It tasted of the well, cold and mineral. Then she saw the walls. The photographs came first. Black and white portraits of men in uniform, standing in front of tanks, helicopters, command tents. Some with helmets under arms. Others with arms around comrades. One face appeared more than others, a strong jaw, stern brow, and dark eyes that bore into the camera. He wore medals and every SH*T, though his expression never changed. Beneath the photos were newspaper clippings, their corners yellow and curling. Headlines told a story in pieces: Colonel disappears after Pentagon investigation. Hero or hunted? Daniel Brown, where is he now? There were military patches framed beside the articles. One bore a single star. Another, the emblem of a special operations unit she vaguely remembered from a documentary. She turned slowly, piecing together what she saw. The man in the photos, the decorated soldier, the missing officer, he was here. Not just present in spirit. In the contours of the face and frame, the man who stood outside was unmistakable. He had changed, yes. The years had weathered him, softened his muscle, added gray to his temples. But it was him. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She asked instead if she could use the bathroom. He pointed silently. On her way back, she noticed the barn. Its side door was ajar, and instinct tugged her that way. Just a glance, she told herself. Just a look before she left. Curiosity, like hunger, couldn't be ignored for long. The barn was mostly empty. Hay bales stacked in uneven pyramids. Old tools hung from rusted nails. A tractor older than her car sat beneath a tarp. But one thing stood out. In the back, beneath a narrow shaft of dusty light, was a cellar door. Its padlock gleamed, a shine too new for the setting. The wood around it was worn, but the metal lock looked as if it had been installed last week. Something about that contrast didn't sit right. She didn't touch it. Just stared. Listened to the silence. When she returned to the house, he was gone again. Somewhere outside, perhaps checking fence lines or tending to the animals she hadn't seen. But on the counter, beside her glass of water, lay a set of keys. And with them, the padlock. The cellar was no longer sealed. And part of her, the part that had been whispering since she saw the first photo, knew exactly what she would find if she went below. She stood still for a long time, eyes locked on the keys beside the water glass. The farmhouse remained silent, as if holding its breath. The wind outside rattled the window panes faintly, a sound that now felt heavier with implication. She reached out, hesitated only for a moment, then picked up the keys. The cold metal stung slightly against her palm. Nothing about this felt like trespassing. It felt, strangely, like permission. The walk back to the barn took longer than it should have, not in distance but in thought. Each step felt weighted. Attention had crept into the quiet, the kind of stillness not born of peace, but of secrets waiting to be seen. She passed the same tools, the same scattered hay. The same dim shaft of light cutting through the high windows. And then, there it was again. The cellar door. She crouched and inserted the key. The lock clicked open with barely any resistance. She pulled the door upward, it groaned, long and low, and a faint smell drifted up from below. Not rot, not mold, but the dry scent of paper, dust, and time. A narrow staircase led downward, steep and unguarded. A bulb dangled from the ceiling near the bottom, its pull cord swaying slightly in the draft. She descended. The temperature dropped immediately. The air was dense. A single bulb clicked on overhead with a hum, casting a pale yellow light across the room. It was not a cellar in the traditional sense. There were no canned goods, no tools, no evidence of farm life. Instead, it looked like a forgotten archive. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes labeled in neat handwriting. She stepped forward carefully, brushing her fingers over the labels. Logbook, FOB Falcon, 2002. After Action Report, Mosul Inquiry. Brown, Daniel, Personnel File. Command Correspondence, Classified. One of the shelves held framed photographs. Some matched those in the house above, men in fatigues, soldiers smiling despite sand and heat. Others were more private. A woman in a red dress. A boy no older than 10, grinning as he held a football. The corners of the photos were bent, the colors slightly faded, but these were not relics of duty, they were remnants of a life. One shelf held a collection of medals in velvet-lined boxes. Among them, the Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, a unit coin marked with a black scorpion, and beneath those, a laminated newspaper front page folded in half. She picked it up and read slowly. Colonel Daniel Brown vanishes amidst Pentagon corruption scandal. Allegations mount as records go missing. She recognized the story now. 2 decades ago, the headlines had flooded every outlet. A respected career officer implicated in a procurement scandal involving defense contractors and the disappearance of mission-critical gear. Millions of dollars in contracts, falsified logs, and a quiet suggestion of deeper betrayal. Then, nothing. Brown had vanished. Presumed dead, his last known location a military base that burned in an unexplained fire days after the investigation was launched. The Pentagon had released a statement. Flags were lowered. A memorial was held. But no body was found. And yet here he was. The man upstairs. Living not under a new name, but under the weight of the old one, buried in silence and forgotten spaces. She sat down on a wooden stool beside one of the crates. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted another folder. Inside were letters, some typed, others handwritten. Communications between officers. Testimonies. Pages redacted in thick black lines. The deeper she read, the clearer it became. He hadn't disappeared because he was guilty. He had disappeared because he had been made into a scapegoat. One memo stood out. A signed directive from a general's office recommending containment measures to preserve morale and strategic cohesion, language that read more like a script than a policy. A man caught between power and sacrifice. She imagined what it must have felt like to walk away from everything to preserve a truth that no one wanted to hear. To live alone in the fields while the world forgot your name. The bulb flickered above her, drawing her thoughts back. She placed the folder down gently and stood. When she emerged from the cellar, the sun had dipped lower in the sky. The golden hour stretched across the barn floor in long amber shadows. He stood just beyond the door, not watching, not waiting, just there. As if he knew. As if he had always known she would go down there. She looked at him fully now, not with confusion or suspicion, but with understanding. The silence between them was no longer emptiness. It was mutual recognition. She returned to the farmhouse once more, this time walking slower. The air had changed. Or perhaps she had. Her car waited where she had left it, the engine repaired, the route still long ahead. But the urgency had passed. Inside the kitchen again, she rinsed her glass at the sink. He set something on the table behind her, not a folder this time, but a thick envelope. Unmarked, sealed. She didn't open it. Not yet. But she understood its contents. Not just money. Trust. There was no speech, no farewell, no warning not to speak of what she had found. There didn't need to be. She left the farmhouse behind as the wind picked up again across the fields. The road ahead was still empty. The signal still absent. But the world felt different. Larger. And she carried with her not only an envelope but the knowledge that some men did not vanish into history, they walked away from it, hoping to live in peace before someone, someday, saw them clearly again. Jenna kept the envelope sealed. She placed it gently in her glove compartment without looking at its contents, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, respect. The drive away from the farm felt surreal. The dust swirled in her rearview mirror, erasing the house from sight within seconds. It felt like driving out of a different time, as if she'd stumbled into a page from a story meant to remain unread. But now she carried it with her, whether she wanted to or not. Back on the highway, signal returned slowly. Bars blinked back to life. Texts pinged in. Missed calls. Traffic updates. The noise of the world reasserting itself. But Jenna ignored it. Her thoughts circled one name, Colonel Daniel Brown, and the weight of a truth buried for 20 years. She pulled into a gas station 2 towns away and parked in the far corner, engine off. The sun was setting, casting the station and its cracked pavement in long stretches of orange and purple. She opened the envelope. Inside were $50 bills. Crisp. Clean. Unmarked. Below them, a folded piece of paper. Not a letter. Just a copy of a citation, Brown's original commendation for valor. Dated 1997. Signed by a general who had later testified against him. There was nothing else. No plea, no request. Just legacy, handed off like a quiet confession. She knew what she'd seen in that cellar would never be reported. There was no use. The men who had signed those documents were either gone, buried under stars and stripes, or still too powerful to challenge. The military had already buried the story. But something in her refused to let it fade completely. Over the following weeks, Jenna found herself researching at night. Quietly. Anonymously. Archive databases. Military records. Obituaries. Every mention of Brown came with the same note, presumed dead after base fire, 2004. But now she knew the fire had been orchestrated. She'd seen the internal documents in that cellar. The fake logs. The fake dates. It was too perfect. And yet, not perfect enough to hide from someone who had stood in that basement. But as the truth came into focus, Jenna did something unexpected. She stopped searching. She closed the files. Logged out of the forums. She let the man remain a ghost. Not because he didn't deserve to be found, but because maybe, just maybe, staying lost was the only peace left for him. The world had already decided what to believe. She had seen the truth. That would have to be enough. And yet, change never stays still. 2 months later, she returned to her small job at a rural newspaper in Topeka. Local pieces, mostly. Road work delays. School board meetings. But that winter, a routine assignment landed on her desk, an upcoming Veterans Memorial dedication in a nearby town. The name caught her eye first. It wasn't Daniel Brown. But one of the names engraved on the new memorial wall was a man she recognized from a photo in the cellar, Lieutenant Marcus Bell, Brown's second-in-command. He had died in the fire as well. Or so they said. That night, she went back to her notes. Just for a moment. She compared names, dates, assignments. The pieces clicked too easily. Everyone connected to that mission had either been reassigned, dishonorably discharged, or declared dead. All within 6 months of each other. It had never been about one man. It had been about erasing a whole command unit, one that had refused to comply with a cover-up. And Brown had chosen to carry that silence alone. It was in the quiet after that realization that she began writing. Not an article. Not a report. Just a page. One page. A story, masked by metaphor, colored with fiction, structured like a local legend. She didn't name names. But the message was clear to anyone who had ever served. It was a story about a man who disappeared, not to hide, but to protect. A man who took blame because the truth endangered people he'd sworn to defend. It was published as a short in the Sunday edition. Most readers skimmed it. But some didn't. 1 week later, she received a letter at her office, no return address. Inside was a photograph. Black and white. Weather-worn. It showed Brown with his unit. Same as the photo in the farmhouse. But someone had circled a face in the background, herself. Or someone who looked eerily like her, from decades earlier. A note on the back, "Your father was one of us. We thought you should know." The shock was like cold water down her spine. She stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she turned it over again and again. It made no sense. She had no memory of her father's service. Her mother had died young. She had grown up with an uncle who never spoke of the past. But now, there it was. A thread in the dark. She drove back to the farmhouse the next day. But the land was empty. No house. No barn. Just a field of trampled grass and the remnants of tire tracks. Like a camp that had been struck overnight. No sign of the seller. No sign of him. Just one thing left nailed to a fence post, a dog tag. Weathered. Scarred. The name was faint. But it was there. Brown, Daniel M. U.S. Army. Opos. Catholic. She picked it up and held it in her palm. The weight was too heavy for its size. She understood now. He had given her more than money. He had given her a piece of a puzzle her family had buried. He had given her a direction. A quiet legacy. The farmhouse had never meant to be permanent. Some places are only meant to be found once. She kept the dog tag in a small wooden box on her bedside table. Not because it needed safekeeping, but because it didn't belong in a drawer or display. It was not a trophy. It was the last sentence of a story few would ever hear in full. And yet, she touched it each morning, like one might a photograph or a folded letter. Not to remember, she would never forget, but to stay grounded in the truth she now carried. Her life returned to normal in outward ways. She still walked to work, still typed stories that filled the corners of community life, school fundraisers, road closures, small-town heroes. But beneath it all lived a second pulse, quiet and steady. Something had changed. And not just in her. She had started seeing things differently. The man who sat on the park bench every afternoon wasn't just passing time, he was waiting to be noticed. The woman who handed out candy at the library was doing it not for children, but for the memory of one she'd lost. Everyone had stories folded beneath their silence. Months passed. The spring thaw brought warmth to Kansas again, melting the frost from window panes and memories alike. One morning, a package arrived at her office. Wrapped in brown paper. No name, no stamp. Inside was a single item, a military challenge coin. Heavy. Etched with an eagle and shield, and the Latin inscription, Semper Vigilans. Always vigilant. On the back, a line was engraved. For silence with honor. That afternoon, she walked to the edge of town where the new Veterans Memorial had been completed. The dedication was modest, a bronze plaque, a list of names, a small stone bench beside a tree newly planted in the field. She sat quietly, watching the wind move through the grass. A small group gathered near the stone. Local officials. A few veterans. And a man in uniform who stood at attention while the mayor gave a short speech. Jenna recognized him from an old photograph, the same man who had stood beside Brown in one of the unit photos in the cellar. Now a retired general. No press. No television. Just words spoken to those who needed to hear them. He spoke briefly of duty. Of sacrifice. Of a unit erased from history but not from memory. And then, with great care, he placed a second dog tag into a small glass capsule beneath the tree's roots. Not a grave, but a marker. A symbol of what could not be buried. The townspeople clapped softly. A trumpet played taps. No one asked questions. Jenna remained on the bench long after the others left. She understood now that the farmhouse had never truly been hidden. It had simply waited. Waited for someone who would see without needing to expose. Who would witness without the need for reward. The envelope had been a test, yes, but also a gift. One last good deed entrusted to a stranger whose heart was in the right place. She wrote about the memorial dedication in the next Sunday paper. A simple story. No names. Just a reflection on those who served, and those who continued to serve in quieter ways. At the end of the article, she included a single line. Some legacies are not built in the light. Some are guarded in silence, shaped by dignity, and passed on in moments that change only one life, but change it completely. The article went unnoticed by most. A few readers clipped it and pinned it to their fridges. One veteran mailed her a thank you note. No one asked what had inspired it. That was fine. The story was no longer hers to share. She saw him once more. Or thought she did. It was in a market outside Wichita. A man in line ahead of her bought canned goods, coffee, and a pack of batteries. Wore a faded baseball cap pulled low. Paid in cash. As he turned to leave, he paused. For a moment, their eyes met. There was no sign of recognition. No smile. No signal. But something passed between them, a stillness, a knowing. Then he turned and disappeared into the afternoon crowd. She didn't follow. Didn't call out. Some people return to the world in fragments. A glance. A gesture. A coin left behind. That night, she took the dog tag from its box and placed it beside the coin. Then she picked up her notebook and began to write, not as a journalist, but as a witness. Not for publication. Just for the truth. To preserve the story in case someone, someday, needed it. There were no headlines. No punctuation of drama. Only a steady, unfolding truth told in quiet paragraphs. And on the final page, she wrote, "Kindness without question is enough."